Welcome to Let's Talk AppSecOps. My name is Mark Lambert, Chief Product Officer here at ArmorCode, and I'm joined by my good friend Luis Guzman. Luis, how are you doing?
I'm doing excellent, senor. How are you?
I'm good. I'm looking forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks and hopefully doing some live sessions together physically.
As the kids say, IRL, in real life.
There you go. There you go. All right. So today's topic, let's talk about threat intelligence and how we can use that as part of our AppSecOps program. So application security, infrastructure security, vulnerability management. How can we leverage this? Obviously, let's start with vulnerability management and, your background on the infrastructure side. Obviously, threat intelligence has been a staple over there, right?
Oh, it's been around for a while, right? There's TIPS, right? Threat intelligence platforms, right? There's been OSINT, all right, open source intelligence. So you could pay for something, or you could make something, or you could just put a whole bunch of conglomerate of data in a CSV, which I loathe, by the way. You and I have talked about that before. But then
spreadsheets.
Yep, more spreadsheets. Yay. But all of that to say is, with that data, there's points of information that you're going to need to secure yourself. That's all it is. And so the more data we have, the better we can secure ourselves theoretically.
Yeah, and I think it comes in, it's an important component when we start talking about prioritizing work. I mean, there's the concept of risk-based vulnerability management, right? Where we're taking, in essence, that threat intelligence information to start scoring vulnerabilities and giving us a prioritized order of what's going to have the most importance for the business. When I think about it from an application security side, which obviously is where my background comes from, a lot of people get kind of confused between CVEs, which is the vulnerability, right? And that's the thing that gets scored, MVD being the public database, which gives us a scoring. We'll talk about that more in a minute. But then CWEs, which are weaknesses, potential problems that a vulnerability is actually using to exploit. But when we're thinking about static application security testing, for example, that doesn't directly translate to a CVE. And also, even when we're talking about DAST or pen testing, doesn't always translate directly to a CVE. So, for today's conversation, though, let's kind of like focus in on CVEs and how we can use that threat intelligence. I mentioned NVD already, the National Vulnerability Database. Kind of get what you pay for, right? I mean, it's something better than nothing, but I think you've got some background there as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, being able to have a threat feed that you can say there's a lot of acceptance in the market, because I would think that a CVE is the beginning of where you want to start, right? With the CVSS score connected to the CVE, and you've got a baseline to understand where you're at. But then adding that CWE is huge, right? The access control, understanding what that means and what numbers might be connected to that CVE. There's a whole slew of things we could do, but you have to start somewhere. You can't go nowhere.
Yeah. So we start with MVD, right? CVSS base score, which is a combination of the impact and the exploitability, but it is a little theoretical. The other open source feed, which definitely is helpful to give a bit more reality context, is the CISA KEV, so the known exploit vulnerability catalog, telling us which CVEs have known exploits against them. So therefore, they should be higher priority, right? They should be ones we should prioritize more than a CVE that doesn't have a known exploit in the market.
Right, the KEV, as I like to call it.
Yeah, the Kev.
Kev. Yeah, so this is my buddy Kev, right?
So, but neither of these, so these are both open source, right? Is that good enough? There's a lot of commercial vendors out there, and a lot of folks, kind of like trading off as to who's better versus the other. So why do I need to pay for something if I've got this open source, libraries available to me?
So context is huge, right? So understanding, like, there's a lot of companies out there, like really good ones, like Recorded Future. Shout out to them, because the information that they're bringing in is utilized by a bunch of lighthouses that are actually out and getting popped, and people are checking all of their logs, checking Windows security logs to understand what kind of behavior they have and how that's contextually based to a potential prospect or victim. Because now you can say, hey, if I'm in a Windows environment, this is what it would look like. If I'm in a Linux environment, this is what it would look like. Now you have a lot more context to utilize when you're paying for it, as opposed to having to go build all of that yourself. You're paying for all of that curated content, number one, the context, number two, and then really that exploit factor, because what if there's something that's being called out in the lab, but not so much in the wild, right? Those two real, very crucial components come up.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that context is key. I mean, the context from an industry perspective, has it been exploited? Is it actively, being exploited in many places or just one or two? Do I have certain threat actors, ransomware families that are leveraging this particular exploit, which increases the potential risk? So that base score from MVD is just a starting point, as you were saying before, and I think it's a good sign. It's better than nothing, right? But you layer KEV on top of that, and then you layer on top of KVE kind of like more information around kind of like other folks within the industry. You're relating into that dark web information, so you're understanding what chatter is going on within hacker forums, and you can start to predict which potential vulnerabilities could become exploited in the near future. So that predictability is also additional context. I'd also add something that threat intelligence feeds can't give you is the context for your organization. So you don't know, threat intelligence doesn't know that, hey, this particular application is your front-end web app versus your back-end data science app. I know I overuse these two examples, but that same vulnerability, even if it's exploited, is going to have a different priority based on that front end versus the back end. So I think that's an additional layer of context, which is important as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you and I have talked about before. Restaurants have a front of the house, back of the house, and everybody that plays inside of the house, have their different roles. And I think the intelligence side, using the restaurant, analogy, is understanding that the threat intel is understanding who's going to come in the back door for employees and the front door for customers, and who may use both. So just contextually speaking, that's important. Right? Mark wants to know what's happening in Mark's environment. Luis wants to know what's happening in Luis's environment. So that kind of points us to ADDIE. And I know you haven't talked about it too much, but ADDIE is something that we really want, to talk about later, or maybe, but it's something that we should explore.
Yeah. So ATI, for those that don't know, ArmorCode's internal nomenclature is the Advanced ArmorCode Threat Intelligence. So bringing in a lot of the things that we just talked about, hacker forum information, predictability scoring, and these things to help with that prioritization. There's certainly a law of diminishing returns if you think about it. So, it's almost like an S curve. If you do, you don't do anything, you're not going to get much, right? You do open source, you get a little bit of an uptake. You then do commercial, you're going to get a big spike. And then you're going to get the more commercial feeds that you add, the less actual value you're going to get incrementally, should I say. Like incremental value from second feed is probably pretty good. Third, fourth, fifth, you're going to get reduced returns on that investment. Certainly with ATI, what we're doing is we're bringing that simplicity of a commercial threat intelligence feed into that business context that we just talked about, and bringing those together as part of the application security operations platform that gives you the ability to combine not just using this threat intelligence information for infrastructure vulnerabilities, but also those vulnerabilities that are assigned and identified within the code base itself. So I think there's more stuff that could be done here as well. I think this is also an area where looking at the patches that are available, looking at remediation priorities based upon the, if you like, the scope of impact, and other areas that really threat intelligence can really help you optimize when you're just overwhelmed with data, right? I think that's the key thing for me.
And speaking of overwhelmed, I think we're at time for this one.
I think we are. All right. Great conversation there, Luis. Enjoy it as always. You take care, my friend, and I'll see you all next time. Thank you very much for watching. Stay tuned for our next episode.
Talk to you.